My name is Akash. I'm your host. I'm the CEO of Airtime, an autonomous product discovery platform turning raw user feedback into product insights. And today I'll be talking to Lidia Oshlyansky. Lidia, you can correct me later if that was way off, also if it was a little bit off. And we're going to talk about localizing products. And this is a topic that is really close to Lydia's heart. And she's a product and UX leader with over 20 years of experience in companies like Spotify, Google, or Nokia. I'm really grateful you accepted my invitation. Thanks for being here. And I'd like to ask you to get an introduction about yourself.
Sure. Hello, it's Lydia, and you got the surname pretty close. It's Oshlyansky. A little bit about me. Well, you've already said quite a few things. So I've worked in tech for 26 years. I have an undergraduate in psychology and then a master's and a PhD in human-computer interaction. And the topic of sort of culture, localization, making culturally sensitive products is very near and dear to my heart. My PhD topic was actually applying cultural models into design and product development. So I've been doing that for quite some years. I live in Sweden. I am not Swedish. I've lived here for 12 years. Before that, the UK. I grew up in the US and I was actually born in Ukraine. So Sweden is my fourth country, which is another reason I care about culture and how we kind of understand and use that context.
Amazing. Thank you. And I think that's like a perfect segue to one of the first topics I'd like to explore with you, what it actually means for, and let's focus our discussion today to software companies. What does it mean in general for software companies to localize their products? I wonder if you could give like a couple of examples from your past.
Sure. I mean, sometimes it is really surface level, which is, sort of the basics of adjusting things like time zone, currencies, date formats, time formats, language, obviously. And that's kind of the surface level of like, here's the app. It works the same way in every country, everywhere. But we're going to make sure that all of the formatting and all of the language that we're using is the language of the target country. Sometimes it can go much deeper because the way that something is done or the way that something is understood in a particular culture is different from where the software was built. And so it would go all the way down to how the user flows work, what comes first, second, third, what's visible on each screen and why. So it can go extremely deep or be very, very surface. And it very much depends on the company and how much time and energy they want to spend on it, and also whether or not it's needed. A great example of this is if you go on the Wayback Machine online and go look at things like airline websites from, let's say, 20 years ago, from the birth of the internet. And you'll see this huge, huge difference between something like British Airways and another airline like, I don't know, give me something like South African Airlines. I don't know. Let's just make it up as we go along. Or Japan Air. And now if you look at those websites, they're pretty much the same. Like, maybe the layout is slightly different, but the way that you book on any airline site anywhere in the world is pretty much the same. It's date, time, from, to, right? It just wasn't like that when the internet first started, and there you could see like massive cultural differences between those airline websites and the way that they were designed. But you don't see that anymore because we've kind of standardized that practice.
Okay, so it means these kind of local differences can also disappear in certain user flows over time.
Maybe. So there's a difference between something that becomes very internationalized and the way that we do something becomes very internationalized. I don't know if it disappears or if Western culture just sort of dominates. And I mean, that's, I think, a whole different discussion. But yeah, what you do see very often as technology progresses is that things become more similar. But that's not always the case, because sometimes things are deeply embedded in the way that people think and the way that they prefer to be, and that change is not going to come. So a good example is Spotify launched Spotify India, and it's a fairly different experience than the Spotify that would be used outside of sort of the Indian subcontinent, in that very few of us search by language. I don't search for English language music. I just search for an artist or a song. But in India, you might search by language. And very frequently you do. And music is sectioned off that way. Sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah. No, no, no. I interrupted you. So, but also in India, if I'm not mistaken, there are a lot of languages, a lot of local
Yes,
languages, also
yes,
within India.
yes, yes. Many, 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 many. Um, so a lot of folks will search by their language, so their mother tongue. They might search by Hindi. They may search by the mother tongue in which they practice their faith. But also in India, you would possibly search by movie title because a lot of the music is tied with Bollywood. You might search by director or by actor, and that's kind of not common in the rest of, well, at least not in the Western world. We might search by movie title if we want a soundtrack. Like that was really popular in the 80s and 90s when I grew up, soundtracks to films. But that's still an edge case. Whereas in India, that would be a normal case. And so if you think about Spotify India, the entire way that you search and you discover music might be really different from the way that you would use the Spotify on your phone right now.
So this is really interesting, and I don't know if you were there when Spotify entered India, but was
Yeah,
it
that
something
was one of my
that
teams.
was already clear on day one when you launched the app in India, or is it something that you learned along the way and then changed the product
Um,
experience?
so we changed the product experience before launching it because we'd done a lot of research and we listened to our local teams to understand how music is consumed and what is done in some of the competitor apps. We were not the first on the market. Spotify India, I didn't launch that many years ago. So again, that was one of my teams working on that. So we did quite a bit of ground research to understand music consumption and music preferences before. But you could have also discovered that with some desk research. I mean, these are some fairly well-known facts about music consumption in India. You could have easily sat for a couple of hours and just the surface that I've covered, like, oh, they search by language, they will often listen to devotional music in a particular language, and then maybe, their sort of preferences for rap otherwise. Um, or the fact that a lot of the music is tied to the Bollywood culture. Those are very surface level things that you could have easily discovered by spending a couple of hours doing research.
Mhm. And let's talk about this experience or this process of localizing the product experience for the Indian market. Do you have some sort of like a toolkit or a framework that you apply when you have a product in country X and you're knowing you're entering a different market, which is
Oh,
substantially different culturally? Some sort of like a workflow that you go through to get
yeah,
yourself acquainted.
I definitely do. So I think the easiest thing to do first is your desk research. So my first step is admit that you don't know, and you possibly don't know what you don't know. So the second step is, okay, we'll start just doing some research about, how, so again, if we're talking about music or if we're talking about food, how do they buy food? How often do they shop? Is it the local grocer or is it, the Costco that they go to twice a month and stock up on enough food to feed an army? Like, what are the preferences? And a lot of that information is available through various sources online. Get some of the basics about demographics, about income levels. Like, this is really important for product market fit. Most of the world can't afford $9.99 a month USD for a subscription. They really can't. We're extraordinarily wealthy in the Western world, and that's a lot of money for a lot of people. So again, you can discover that with desk research. So step one, admit you don't know what you don't know. Step two, do a little bit of desk research, at least start getting acquainted. I always suggest finding local sources and local people to try and educate. I always recommend trying to go into the field, but not every small company can afford to do that. Being there and being in the field and understanding how people are using your technology is possibly one of the most powerful things you can do for localization. It will instantaneously put you in your place because they are not you and you are not them, and you will learn something within the first few minutes, probably. But that's not always possible, and it's quite expensive. So then at least try to use things like social networks or even LinkedIn and crowdsource some folks who do know that culture and do know that context and do know that, I'm not going to say country because cultures cross borders, but they know something about that culture that you don't, because it will be very powerful. And that could be, it could be something that you assume you know a lot about because it's everywhere or it's similar to your culture. When I moved from the US to the UK, I really thought it would be a fairly easy cultural adjustment. I mean, heck, we speak the same language. Turns out, heck, no, we don't. And it is actually a really different culture. Even though British TV, British music, it's everywhere. And I grew up with a lot of British TV, but it turns out that watching Benny Hill reruns with my dad, totally inappropriate, and, Monty Python did not prepare me for living in the UK, right? So even when we think that we know, we probably don't know.
Yeah. Funny that you mentioned Monty Python. I don't know if it's a true story, but I like the story that apparently when it aired in the US, it was subtitled
That's very
because
possible.
the actors have such thick accent. It's really difficult if you're not UK.
There's a Guy Ritchie movie called Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, and that
A
definitely has,
classic.
especially when there are scenes sort of in the heart of East London, and they're speaking with a really thick sort of East London. Yeah, there's subtitles. But I lived in East London, and sometimes that accent is really, really difficult.
Yeah. Um, so this is super fascinating. So to paraphrase what you said, you start with desk research, acknowledge that you don't know, also what you don't know. Try to go on the field and see how people use your product there. And then if you can't do that, at least try to reach out to people who know that culture. Is there anything else that you do?
I think one of the things that I really ask my teams to do is not to be too precious about the things that they are going to have to give up or change, but there's also the flip side of that. Like, you are a business. Most of us work for profits, not for non-for-profits. There are certain things that from a business perspective and, well, really an economics perspective, you're not going to change. It's a non-negotiable. And so you're going to have to make some sacrifices in that regard as well. So something may not be completely culturally appropriate or done within the bounds of the existing cultural norms, but maybe because of your product vision or your product mission, you're not going to change them.
Yeah, or maybe the implementation cost is too much.
Yeah, very possible.
I was wondering if because when you did, let's stick to this example, you went through the desk research and other types of research, and then you have a number of findings which tell me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but I assume you translate into okay, these are the things, these are the initiatives that we need to make to localize our product. Do you prioritize? Do you end up with such a list? And if yes, do you prioritize it somehow?
So yeah, you'll probably end up with multiple lists, especially if it's a really large scale product. I mean, obviously, like a massive music and podcast product like Spotify is quite complex. So you're going to end up with multiple lists of all sorts of things. And you do prioritize. You will probably select some sort of prioritization framework about the impact and the reach that, a particular feature or a particular change will have, and the effort it takes to, change it. I've just basically defined the RICE framework, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Whatever framework you choose and whatever reasons you choose, just stick to them and prioritize based on whatever the team and the company, decision is in terms of what comes first and what comes last. And again, there's going to be things that you won't do for various reasons. And there might be things that are really, really critically important to do. So especially for products that are constrained by regulations or laws, fintech, insurtech, all of those industries, every country is different. In my last job, it was an insurtech company, and we launched in the US, and every single US state is different. So you think you're launching one country, but you're actually launching 50, because every single one of those states has slightly different regulations around insurance.
Wow. Yeah. That's difficult, and although like a personal story that I can relate to that is when I talk to investors, they always ask me if we're like up to expand to the U.S. and like one of the limitations that I know about myself and my business that like speaking English doesn't mean, and even the decent English, it doesn't mean that I have a notion of the sales process, how it's done, or these social games that people play in the US versus Germany, where I live, or in Hungary, where I come from. But it's easy to underestimate. No, it's easy to think that you just have to translate your website, and your
But this
product
is,
is going to sell itself because it's a successful product. It's a great product.
I think that's really true. I think it's really easy to underestimate. And again, folks predominantly think that they know American culture because it surrounds us. It's a very dominant world culture, right? Movies, music, books, politics, like everything. It's really easy to assume that we understand it, but very honestly, America's a giant country. There are multiple states. I spent 25 years of my life there. I haven't been to most of the states in the United States. So I have no idea what they do in Texas because I've only been there twice and only for a few days at a time. And it's a huge state. So I can't really tell you how something would work for the Texas population because I don't know the Texas population. I'm picking on Texas. I apologize to Texas. So I think it's really, again, important to understand the limitations, and you may never know. So you've got to understand that you're localizing for the 80% probably, and you may never get to that 20%. And I think especially when investors are asking you about expanding to the US, there are some states that have really tiny populations and other states that have really huge populations, and you want to target those first. So
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
looking at
yeah.
the North Coast counts, the ones on the Great Lakes,
Yeah, good point. Is there a point where you say that, okay, we move to a new country, we localize our product, and our job is done?
No, sorry. It's a very blunt
No,
answer. I don't think there's such a thing as having a product done. If it's a digital product, we haven't sold this, right? So you're not selling a physical glass.
yeah,
So once I've released this glass and someone has bought this glass, it will be in their cupboard until somebody breaks it, or they recycle it, or they give it away to charity, or whatever. With a digital product, we're constantly tweaking it. We're constantly adding things, taking things away, hopefully getting a better understanding of how people use it, a better understanding of how we can monetize it. So no, you should never just be leaving it alone. And I think that should be happening at a cultural level as well as a global level, right? So the international product is evolving, which means the local products should be evolving.
and in your time, and this can be Spotify, but also other companies, when you localize the product, did you have a specific team, people who you took from other departments and assembled for this purpose to launch a product in a particular market, or how? What's
So
Maybe I leave it at the question there.
India had a large team that was working on Spotify India as a product, because it was different from the main product. Spotify
Yeah.
has a localization team, which I managed, which are localization experts, but different companies will do this differently. So the localization team at Spotify works across the products all over the company. So they're not embedded in a single product team. They work with everyone. I mean, that's a great question. So Google used to have the emerging markets team, which I was part of. That team was sunset, and a new team called Next Billion Users was spawned or started. I think that one's also been sunset. It really depends. Every company has its own approach to this. Smaller companies, I mean, if you're a company of 200 people, you're not going to have a team for each country. That would be impossible. You'd have one person per country. So you're probably going to have your teams working across cultures for quite some time. But again, as long as you've got a process in place to track changes and to understand what you're doing, you're probably not going to hire translators. You'll probably use a translation agency. You'll probably not, send photographers out to get culturally appropriate images. You'll probably source those online as well. So all those things just have to be taken into consideration every single time you build. And the smaller the company, the harder that is to do, because you will not have dedicated people per country. I don't know anybody that has dedicated people per country, unless you're talking about Salesforce, right? Like as in, not the company, as in your salespeople sit in the countries where they sell the product.
Yeah, I'm curious on this line of thought. Has it ever happened to you that you were part of a team that localized the product, and at one point you had to pull the plug and take the product out of a market? Can you share this experience, how it unfolded?
The country in which you live is my Achilles heel. I have never successfully launched in Germany. We can have a whole conversation about why that is. But I honestly am beginning to take it personally.
Tell me about it.
Uh, a small startup that I worked for called Dreams, which is fintech. It helps people sort of create healthier spending and saving
Hmm.
habits. We tried to launch in Germany. We tried to launch with a savings product. Germany has a very interesting identity verification hurdle to cross. You have to take a photo of your ID, and then it has to be matched to your face. And
Yeah.
then also, you guys have what in Sweden would be called a person number, and in America is called a social security number, and in England is called a national identity or a national insurance number. You have one of those, but nobody knows it. And in order to open a financial account, you need it. But Germans have a very interesting history with numbering, and so therefore they don't use their numbers. And so therefore, if you want to try and get a German person to register for a new financial account, first you have to explain to them where to go find this number. Then you have to go through like 10 screens to get them to identify themselves. And if you haven't lost 99.9% of your potential user base by then, hurrah. So yeah, that was an interesting learning curve. We failed.
Wow, wow. I that reminds me of a story of when I used to work at a few fintechs in Germany, and one of was an investment platform for deposits, fixed term deposits, and we had a partner bank in Croatia. Like every bank, they have their form when you want to open a fixed term deposit, and in their form they had the mother's name. Now, this is something that is I didn't even think about it twice because in every single form, my mother's name is asked in Hungary. That's the key way to identify ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, but apparently, like with the customer groups and in that we had, and in Germany, this was a very private question that people were really unhappy to answer, even for an interest rate premium that they could get from a Croatian bank.
But Germans have a very interesting relationship to privacy. And again, so this is another massive cultural difference that you have to adjust for. Sweden has a tiny population, 10 million people. If you have my person number, you can find out all sorts of interesting things about me just by putting it in. Hell, if you can spell my family name, you can probably find out most of these things. Unless I physically go and argue about it, you can find out how much I paid for this house. To me, that's like highly confidential information, but it's online. I had to ask for it to be taken down, and the person on the other side of the phone was like, "Why?" Like, because I'm not Swedish. But sincerely, it's a completely different, it's almost polar opposite, right? So this one number, my person number, gives somebody access to literally all of my information. That one number can tell you my latest blood test results, as well as the name of my dog.
That's
Like
very
Germans
the exact opposite of
yes, Germans moving here are completely horrified until they get desensitized to it. It's just the way it is here. It also makes our identification processes really easy. I enter my person number. I have this little app called Bank ID. I put in my password and poof, access to everything within seconds.
yeah.
I don't even have
I
to fill in addresses anymore. I just Bank ID.
So Lydia, I'm curious because I think you localize products in a number of countries. We touched on US, UK, Germany, India. Is there a market that you found okay, let's leave Germany out now. But
Germany.
okay, but you can pick if the top of your pick would be Germany. I'm curious which country you find the most difficult to crack in terms of localization.
That's an impossible question for me to answer. So first of all, it's never just me doing it, right? I'm working with these really big teams. There are multiple products that over the years that I've launched in Japan, and that was really tough, with a lot of mistakes, possibly not listening enough to our local folks on the ground and getting their knowledge. So lesson learned. There's a lot of expectations and cultural differences and how Japanese consumers want things packaged and explained and how they understand things. That was a really, really tough for me, especially the first time I did that. But then I learned the lesson of don't second guess your local team. Listen to them very carefully. There's a lot of markets in sub-Saharan Africa that I worked with when I was at Google. I found those really fascinating, especially back then. They had a lot of technologies which were leapfrogged. So I'll give you a really good example. So Kenya has something called M-Pesa, and M-Pesa is tied to your mobile phone. It could be a dumb phone, it doesn't matter. And it's a way of paying or transferring money without ever having a bank account, just by using your mobile phone. And let's be honest, for most of us in Europe and in the US, being able to use my phone to pay for stuff or transfer money without a bank account was really novel until a few years ago, right? Like, it was the
Yeah.
coolest thing in the world that I could finally pay with my phone, or I could transfer money from me to you. Like, oh, thanks for paying for dinner. Let me just, it's like this new technology. But in Kenya, that had been available through M-Pesa on dumb phones for like 2 decades. On
Wow.
the other hand, so that's a leapfrog, right? On the other hand, it's a totally cash dependent society. Still to this day, everything is in cash. And I recently did a talk to students at a communication school here, and I asked them, like, when's the last time any of you used cash? And they were like, because in Sweden we don't use cash, there is no cash. You walk into a cafe and most of them have these little engraved signs that say we don't take cash, in 2 languages. So it's just really interesting, and that's a real dichotomy, and understanding that and learning about that and understanding like when they would use M-Pesa, when they would use cash. That's a massive learning curve for somebody like me who's never lived there, whose team has never lived there, who doesn't experience the same socioeconomic challenges. So a lot of that, let's call it cracking the code, it just takes time and energy. And I'm not going to say it was the toughest to crack. It just takes that little humbleness of admitting I don't know what I don't know.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Very insightful example. Lydia, I have a last question, and this is a question that I ask from every guest because we talk about a lot of stuff in half an hour, and I'd like you to pick 2 or 3 thoughts that you shared in the last 30 minutes. If we only remember those, what should they be?
Please talk to somebody local in the country, maybe more than one person. You can find them. Lots of folks will share their opinions and their knowledge for free. Please don't make assumptions. Please don't think you know. Admit you don't know.
Good, good. Thanks a lot. I see a number of questions in the chat. I urge everyone who's active, who has questions, to throw it in there. I'm gonna put them one by one on the board, and we're gonna start with Ross. It's a longer one, and I let you read through it. In the meantime, I'll just...
Hello, Russ. No, I have never worked as a localizer. That has never been a job title. How did I get into localization? Because I kept on working in markets that I didn't understand and didn't know. So I keep on working in markets that literally I've never lived in, I don't know anything about, I don't speak their language. So I have never been a localizer, so I didn't stumble into the role, but I have managed localization teams. And then again, as I said, my PhD focused very specifically on applying culture and cultural models to try and help us design product. So that's kind of how I came into it to begin with. And the reason for that is because I'm multicultural and I'm not a one thing person, and I've lived in 4 countries, and anytime people ask me where I'm from, I kind of freeze and I'm like, I don't know. I'm from this house.
Cool, thank you. I have a question from Jesse, and we touched on this topic slightly in the discussion earlier.
Yeah.
To hear your thoughts.
So yeah, I think this is a really interesting one, Jesse. So I used to work in agencies and consultancies, and I remember doing, please don't judge, an online gambling site. It was one of our clients. I was poor, I was paying for my PhD, please don't judge. But one of our clients was a gambling site, and we were actually localizing the site to Hebrew and Arabic. And obviously they read not left to right, but right to left. And there was a huge learning curve just at that level, at that really surface level, because it also turns out the buttons remain where buttons are in English or Latin scripts, but everything else goes the other direction. So if you think about just layout and page design, that's a huge change. So your button stays here, but the text is going this way. And that was like mind-blowing, because I would have moved the button over there too, but that's just not how it works, and that's just how it is. So you really have to be careful, much more careful, even at that surface level, without even digging deeper. So just the formats and the way that you lay out pages and the way that you design the app, because the flow of language is different and the way that it's read is different. And so all of your information hierarchies are going to have to switch around to that.
Super, super fascinating. And I think we could talk about each of these places, like Arabic countries, China or Japan, separately.
Yes.
I have another question from Abhinav about localizing in English-speaking countries.
Okay, so the quote is attributed to Churchill, two countries separated by a common language, and he was referring to the US and the UK. Everything's different. In English, it's pants, and in British, it's trousers. And if you tell a British person you like their pants, they think you're commenting on their underwear. Date formats are different. So 12/1/2022 is December 1st, 2022 in American English, but it's actually the 12th of January in British English. And I can go on and on and on. There's tons of shopping cart versus shopping trolley. If you're an e-commerce site, shopping basket is probably the most agnostic one there. Don't even get me started on Australian English. Canada and the US, the language is more similar for sure, but Canadians definitely have their own terminology for things. Sometimes they use British terminology for things. Pram versus stroller. Oh my God, I can go on and on about this. Lift versus elevator. And the thing is that if you use, again, we're just at that level of translation, right? It's the very tip of the iceberg when it comes to localization. If you're using the wrong language, you automatically make me feel like you're not for me. What's a pram? Oh, a baby stroller. Like, why are you talking about my underwear? I want to buy some trousers. What are these pants? I don't want pants. Like, you're automatically going to alienate those users at it's going to be like a deeply psychological, it's just going to feel alien to them. It's going to feel not right because you're not using their language and their terms.
Tell me if I'm like overthinking this, but what you also say, it seems to me that the notion of an MVP, where I say which is very inherent in the tech industry. You have an idea, let's just throw it out. But if you do a localization MVP and you're just not careful enough, it's very easy to alienate users with exactly these subtleties.
You can do. But I would still encourage you to do the MVP. Again, it's not that hard to do that kind of translation. Again, that's all available online. And goodness, ChatGPT will tell you in 3 seconds. So do the MVP and message that like, hey, we're not completely localized yet. Tell us if any of our language is wrong. So Akash, you live in Germany, and German and Austrian German are really different. I don't know how different. I don't speak a word of German. But I know for a fact they're really different, and products have made mistakes by taking the German into Austria, and Austrians going like, that's not how we speak this language. And let's not even start on Swiss German, which as far as I understand is almost a completely different language. So yeah, you might alienate them, but you can also, if it's an MVP, message it, be honest and say, hey, this product is available in German. If you're in Austria or Switzerland and you'd like to use this version, we apologize for the wrong words, right? No worries.
Yeah, that's a good recommendation. Jesse reflected on your answer and came back with another question. This is the last one I see in the chat right now. So if any of you in the audience have further questions, put it in. Otherwise, we'll wrap up after this question.
So, Jesse, I think you're completely right. It's never going to be fully localized. You're always going to put your own flavor on it, right? Because I don't know if you are Japanese, but I'm assuming you're not because you're asking this question. You are speaking in English. They are trying to explain their culture to you in English or whatever language, maybe French, maybe German, it doesn't matter. There's always going to be some inherent bias that gets in there. It's never going to be perfect, but nothing's ever perfect. So doing something to at least make people feel comfortable with your product is better than doing nothing at all. But yeah, and yeah, your selection of people will be biased. Ideally, the local folks that you have in that market will still have their own people and be able to reflect about what they know of their user community as well. So, I mean, I've lived in Sweden for 12 years. I don't actually speak Swedish very well at all. In fact, I don't really speak it. And you could ask me about Swedish culture and I could reflect a lot on it. But I also have Swedes around me that I can be like, so I think it's this way, but I'm not Swedish. Do you think it's that way? And they will tell me. I hope that kind of answers the question.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. With that, let's wrap up. I want to thank to our audience for the activity and for the questions. I also want to thank you, Lydia. It was a truly insightful, entertaining discussion and also a journey across various cultures around the globe. So I'm grateful that you accepted my invitation, and I hope to see you around.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.